Marcus Thompson had always been the type of person who spoke his mind. At 28 years old, he worked as a tour guide for one of London's most popular sightseeing companies. Every day, he led groups of excited tourists through the historic streets, sharing stories about kings and queens, battles and victories. His job required him to be energetic, confident, and sometimes a little pushy to keep groups moving on schedule. On that particular Tuesday morning in September, Marcus felt especially stressed. His girlfriend Sarah had been giving him a hard time about his career choices, suggesting he needed to find something more stable and respectable. His rent was due in 3 days and he was short by 200 pounds. To make matters worse, his tour group that day consisted of 43 people, far more than the usual 25 he was comfortable managing. The group included families with young children, elderly couples moving slowly, teenagers who kept wandering off, and several demanding tourists who questioned every fact he shared. Marcus found himself constantly counting heads, raising his voice to get attention, and feeling increasingly frustrated as the morning wore on. They had already visited Westminster Abbey and Big Ben, and now they were approaching Buckingham Palace for the highlight of the tour. Marcus had given this particular speech about the palace hundreds of times before. He knew every detail about the building's history, the royal family's daily routines, and the famous changing of the guard ceremony. As they walked through St. James's Park toward the palace, Marcus noticed the crowds were heavier than usual. Tour groups, school children, and individual tourists filled the pathways. Street performers competed for attention with music and shows. Vendors called out, selling souvenirs and snacks. The noise level was overwhelming, and Marcus had to shout to keep his group together. When they finally reached the palace gates, Marcus positioned his group in what he thought was a good viewing spot. He began his usual presentation about the palace's 775 rooms, the famous balcony where royals appeared during special occasions, and the symbolism of the royal standard flag flying overhead. But something was different today. The crowd seemed more restless than usual. People pushed and shoved, trying to get better views. Children cried from being overwhelmed. Several tourists complained loudly about not being able to see properly. Marcus noticed his own group starting to spread out dangerously. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman from his tour, was being pushed toward the street by the growing crowd. 2 teenagers from his group had wandered toward the palace gates, ignoring his calls to return. A family with 3 small children looked panicked as people pressed in around them. The situation was becoming chaotic, and Marcus felt his stress levels rising even higher. He had a job to do, people depending on him, and a schedule to maintain. The company had strict rules about keeping tours moving on time, and he was already running 15 minutes behind. As he tried to gather his scattered group members, Marcus noticed the royal guard standing at their posts along the palace perimeter. They stood perfectly still in their iconic red uniforms and tall black hats, rifles at their sides, eyes fixed straight ahead. These guards were famous for never breaking character, no matter what happened around them. Tourists often tried to make them laugh, talk, or react in some way, but the guards remained like statues. Marcus had always admired their discipline and professionalism. In his 4 years of bringing tour groups to this spot, he had watched countless attempts to get reactions from the guards. He had seen tourists dance, sing, tell jokes, and even try to touch the guards, but nothing ever worked. The guards simply stood there, doing their duty with perfect composure. Today, however, Marcus was too stressed and frustrated to appreciate their dedication. All he could think about was controlling his unruly group and getting back on schedule. The crowds continued to push and surge around them, making his job increasingly difficult. That's when he noticed one particular guard standing near a section where his group had gathered. The guard was young, probably in his early 20s, with the same stoic expression as all the others. He stood directly in the path where Marcus needed to move his group to reach their next viewing position. Marcus called out to his group, trying to get them to move toward the guard's position. "Everyone, please gather over here by the guard. We need to stay together." But his voice was lost in the general noise and chaos of the crowd. Frustrated, Marcus began pushing through the crowd toward his group members. He was thinking about Sarah's criticism of his career, about his overdue rent, about his demanding boss who would be angry if he received complaints about the tour. All of these pressures were building up inside him like steam in a pressure cooker. As he reached the area where several of his group members stood near the young guard, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the situation. People were still pushing and shoving around him. His group was scattered and difficult to control. He was falling further behind schedule with each passing minute. In that moment of high stress and poor judgment, Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. Instead of asking people to move politely, instead of finding another route, instead of taking a deep breath and thinking clearly, he decided to take the most direct path to gather his group. The young guard stood directly in his way, unmoving and silent as always. Marcus knew the guards never moved or reacted, so in his frustrated state he convinced himself that a small push wouldn't matter. After all, the guard was trained to ignore everything around him, right? Marcus thought he could just gently move the guard aside and continue with his job. He approached the guard with determination. His mind focused only on regaining control of his tour group and getting back on schedule. The weight of all his problems and pressures had clouded his judgment completely. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and he had no idea what consequences were waiting for him. Without thinking clearly, Marcus placed both hands on the guard's shoulder and gave him a firm push to the side. The moment his hands made contact with the red wool uniform, time seemed to slow down. The guard, whose name was Private James Mitchell, had been standing at his post for over 2 hours in the September heat, maintaining perfect posture and focus. The push wasn't violent or aggressive, but it was definitely intentional and forceful enough to make the guard step sideways to maintain his balance. For a split second, Marcus felt a sense of relief, thinking he had solved his immediate problem. He could now gather his group and move forward with the tour. But that relief lasted exactly 3 seconds. Private Mitchell, despite his training to remain motionless, was also trained to respond to any physical contact or potential threat. The moment Marcus's hands touched him, several things happened simultaneously. Mitchell's training kicked in like a precisely programmed response. His eyes, which had been staring straight ahead, immediately snapped toward Marcus with laser-like intensity. "Sir, step back immediately," Private Mitchell commanded in a voice that carried the authority of centuries of military tradition. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the crowd noise like a sword. "Do not touch the guard." The transformation was instant and startling. The statue-like figure had suddenly become very human and very serious. Marcus froze, his hand still extended from the push as the full weight of what he had done began to sink in. But Private Mitchell's response was just the beginning. Within seconds, other guards who had witnessed the incident began moving toward the scene. Their movements were swift, coordinated, and professional. These weren't just ceremonial figures in fancy uniforms. They were active duty soldiers with real training and real authority. The crowd around Marcus began to notice the commotion. Tourists who had been taking photos and chatting among themselves suddenly turned their attention to the unfolding drama. Cameras and phones appeared from every direction, all pointing toward Marcus and the guards. "Oh no," Marcus whispered to himself as reality crashed down on him like a cold wave. "What have I done?" 2 additional guards approached from different directions, their movements precise and purposeful. They didn't run or rush, but they moved with the kind of determined efficiency that made it clear this was serious business. Their faces remained professional, but there was no mistaking the authority in their bearing. "Sir, you need to step away from the guard immediately," one of the approaching guards instructed Marcus. "Physical contact with a royal guard on duty is not permitted." Marcus felt his face burning with embarrassment and growing fear. His tour group, scattered as they were, had now noticed their guide was at the center of some kind of incident. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman he had been worried about earlier, was staring at him with wide, shocked eyes. The teenagers who had wandered off were now recording everything with their phones. "I'm sorry," Marcus stammered, backing away from Private Mitchell with his hands raised. "I didn't mean anything by it. I was just trying to get my tour group together. I didn't think—" "That's exactly right, sir," Private Mitchell interrupted, his voice still carrying that commanding tone. "You didn't think. This is a serious matter." The crowd around them had grown significantly. What started as a few curious onlookers had become a circle of dozens of people, all watching the confrontation unfold. Marcus could hear whispers and comments in multiple languages as tourists from around the world witnessed his humiliation. "Is that man in trouble?" someone asked. "He pushed the guard," another person explained. "Someone's calling the police," and a third voice added. The word police hit Marcus like a physical blow. Police? He hadn't considered that his moment of poor judgment might actually be illegal. In his stressed and frustrated state, he had thought of the guards as decorative, like street performers or historical reenactors. The reality that they were actual soldiers with real authority was becoming clearer by the second. One of the guards spoke into a small communication device, using codes and terminology that Marcus couldn't understand. He caught fragments like incident at Post 7 and civilian contact, but the full meaning escaped him. However, the official tone made it clear that this was being reported up a chain of command. Marcus's mind raced through the potential consequences. Would he be arrested? Would this affect his job? His tour company had strict policies about professional behavior, and getting into trouble at one of London's most famous tourist sites was definitely not professional. He looked around desperately for support from his tour group, but found only shocked faces and pointing fingers. Some group members looked embarrassed to be associated with him, while others seemed fascinated by the drama they were witnessing. Private Mitchell had returned to his original position, but his alertness remained heightened. He was no longer the statue-like figure from before. His eyes occasionally tracked Marcus's movements, and his posture suggested he was ready to respond to any further incidents. "Sir," one of the other guards addressed Marcus directly, "we need you to remain here while we sort this out. Someone will be coming to speak with you shortly." The phrase, "someone will be coming," filled Marcus with dread. Who was coming? More guards? Police officers? Palace security? His imagination began running wild with possibilities, each one worse than the last. As they waited, Marcus became increasingly aware of the spectacle he had created. More tourists gathered, forming a larger and larger circle around the scene. He heard cameras clicking and phone notifications as people shared photos and videos of the incident on social media. The thought that his moment of stupidity might end up on the internet for everyone to see made his stomach turn. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "How's the tour going? Hope you're having a better day." The irony was devastating. Here he was, having the worst professional moment of his life, while his girlfriend assumed he was just doing his normal job. Marcus realized he would have to explain this to everyone. His girlfriend, his boss, his family, and probably the authorities. The simple tour guide job that Sarah had criticized as unambitious was about to become the source of much bigger problems than an overdue rent payment. The weight of his mistake was growing heavier by the minute, and he hadn't even faced the real consequences yet. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of heavy boots approaching on the pavement. Through the crowd of onlookers, he saw 2 Metropolitan police officers walking purposefully toward the scene. Their presence immediately changed the atmosphere from curious excitement to serious concern. The officers were professional and calm, but their arrival made everything feel much more real and frightening. Marcus had never been in trouble with the police before. His worst previous encounter with law enforcement had been a parking ticket 3 years ago. Now he was about to be questioned about an incident involving royal security. "Good afternoon." The senior officer, Constable Williams, addressed the guards first. "We received a report of an incident involving civilian contact with a guard on duty. Can you brief us on what happened?" Private Mitchell stepped forward and gave a clear, concise report. "Sir, at approximately 2:47 p.m., this individual made physical contact with me while I was on duty. He placed both hands on my shoulder and pushed me to the side. I followed protocol and issued a verbal warning. The individual has been cooperative since then." Hearing his actions described in such official language made Marcus cringe. It sounded so much worse when explained in formal terms. What had felt like a moment of frustration now sounded like an assault on a representative of the Crown. Constable Williams turned his attention to Marcus. "Sir, I'm Constable Williams, and this is Constable Davies. We need to have a word with you about this incident. Could you please step over here with us?" Marcus nodded, feeling his legs trembling slightly as he followed the officers a few steps away from the crowd. His tour group watched from a distance, some looking sympathetic, others appearing embarrassed to be associated with the situation. "First, I need to inform you that you are not under arrest at this time," Constable Williams began, which provided some small relief. "However, we do need to investigate what happened here. Can you tell us in your own words what led to you making physical contact with the guard?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. He knew he needed to be honest, but he also hoped to explain his mindset, without making things worse for himself. "Officer, I'm a tour guide with London Heritage Tours. This is my group." He gestured toward his scattered tourists. "We were running behind schedule, and the crowds were really heavy today. My group members were getting separated, and I was stressed about keeping everyone together." He paused, realizing how weak his excuse sounded even to himself. "When I tried to gather my group, the guard was standing right where I needed to move them. I know the guards don't usually move or react to anything, so in my stressed state I thought I could just gently move him aside. I realize now how completely wrong and inappropriate that was." Constable Davies was taking notes while Williams listened. "You understand that these guards are active duty soldiers performing an official function, not street performers or actors?" "Yes, sir, I understand that now," Marcus replied, feeling his face burning with shame. "I wasn't thinking clearly. It was a moment of very poor judgment, and I deeply regret it." Williams nodded. "What's your full name and address, please?" As Marcus provided his personal information, he noticed his tour group was becoming increasingly restless. Several people were checking their watches and looking frustrated. He realized that not only was he in serious trouble personally, but he was also failing in his professional responsibilities to the people who had paid for his tour. "Officers," Marcus said hesitantly, "I have a professional obligation to these tourists who paid for this tour. Is there any way I could arrange for them to continue with another guide while we sort this out?" Constable Williams looked at the group and then back at Marcus. "That's actually a responsible suggestion. Do you have a way to contact your company?" Marcus pulled out his phone and called his supervisor, David Chen, with shaking hands. The phone rang 3 times before David answered. "Marcus, how's the afternoon tour going?" "David, I'm at Buckingham Palace and I need emergency help. There's been an incident and I need another guide to take over my group immediately." "What kind of incident? Are you injured? Is someone hurt?" Marcus glanced at the police officers who were listening to every word. "No one's hurt, but I made a serious mistake involving one of the royal guards and the police are here. I can't continue the tour." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You did what?" "Marcus, what exactly happened?" "I'll explain everything later, but right now I need you to send someone to take over this group. There are 43 people here who need to finish their tour." David's voice became very serious. "I'm sending Jennifer immediately. She's about 10 minutes away. Marcus, when this is sorted out, you need to come straight to the office. We need to discuss this situation in detail." The call ended, leaving Marcus with the sinking feeling that his job was probably over. London Heritage Tours had a strict reputation to maintain, and having guides get into incidents with police at major tourist sites was definitely not good for business. Constable Davies had finished taking notes and was speaking quietly with Private Mitchell and the other guards. Marcus caught fragments of their conversation about protocol and incident reports, but couldn't make out the details. Meanwhile, the crowd of onlookers had grown even larger. Marcus estimated there were now over 100 people watching the scene unfold. Many were taking photos and videos, and he realized that his face was probably being broadcast across social media platforms around the world. The thought struck him that his parents, who lived in Yorkshire, might see this on the news or social media before he had a chance to explain what happened. His elderly father, who took great pride in British traditions and institutions, would be absolutely mortified to learn that his son had manhandled a royal guard. "Sir," Constable Williams addressed Marcus again, "we're going to need you to come with us to complete some paperwork and formal statements. This incident will need to be properly documented." "Am I being charged with something?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That will depend on several factors, including the guard's statement and the wishes of the Palace Security Office. At minimum, this will be recorded as a security incident. Depending on how it's classified, there could be additional consequences." Marcus felt his knees go weak. The phrase "additional consequences" opened up a world of terrifying possibilities. Could he face criminal charges? Would he have a criminal record? How would this affect his future employment prospects? Just then, he spotted Jennifer Martinez, another tour guide from his company, hurrying through the crowd. She looked professional and composed, but Marcus could see the concern in her eyes as she took in the scene. Police officers, guards, crowds, and her colleague at the center of it all. Jennifer approached the group with professional confidence, but Marcus could see the shock in her eyes as she processed the situation. She had worked with him for 2 years and had never seen him in any kind of trouble, let alone something involving police and royal guards. "Hello," "I'm Jennifer Martinez from London Heritage Tours," she announced to the police officers. "I'm here to take over responsibility for this tour group." Constable Williams nodded approvingly. "That's helpful, Miss Martinez. We'll need a few more minutes with Mr. Thompson, but then you can proceed with your group." Jennifer quickly addressed Marcus's scattered tourists with calm efficiency. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry for this disruption to your tour. If you could please gather around me, we'll continue with your scheduled visit. I'll make sure you see everything you paid for today." Marcus watched with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment as Jennifer smoothly took control of the situation he had created. The tourists, looking relieved to have guidance again, began clustering around her. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman Marcus had been worried about earlier, gave him a sympathetic look as she joined Jennifer's group. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly to Jennifer as she organized the tourists. "Just focus on sorting this out," she replied in a low voice. "David will want to discuss everything when you get back to the office." The reminder about his boss made Marcus's stomach clench even tighter. He knew David Chen was fair but strict about maintaining the company's reputation. An incident involving police at one of London's most important tourist sites was exactly the kind of publicity nightmare that could destroy a tour company's credibility. As Jennifer led his former group away toward the Victoria Memorial, Marcus felt truly alone for the first time since the incident began. The crowd of onlookers was still there, still taking photos and videos, but now he had no professional responsibilities to distract him from the full weight of what was happening. Right then, "Mr. Thompson," Constable Williams said, "we need you to come with us to complete the incident report. You'll be riding with us to Westminster Police Station." The words police station hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had never been inside a police station except once in primary school for a safety presentation. The idea of being taken there as a suspect or person of interest was surreal and terrifying. "Will I need a lawyer?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking slightly. "You have the right to legal representation if you wish," Constable Davies replied. "At this stage, we're conducting an investigation and taking statements. You're not being charged with anything specific yet." The word "yet" hung in the air ominously as they walked toward the police vehicle. Marcus noticed that Private Mitchell and the other guards had returned to their posts, but several palace security officers in civilian clothes had appeared and were speaking with other police personnel who had arrived on scene. As they reached the police car, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Sarah, his girlfriend. For a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail, but realized she would worry if he didn't answer when she expected him to be finished with work soon. "Hello, Sarah," he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hi, how did the tour go? Are you finished for the day?" Marcus looked at the police car, the officers waiting for him, and the continuing crowd of onlookers, some still filming with their phones. "Sarah, something's happened. I'm not hurt, but I'm going to be late coming home tonight." "What do you mean? What's happened?" "I made a really serious mistake at work today and I have to go to the police station to sort it out." There was a long pause. "The police station?" "Marcus, what did you do?" "I'll explain everything when I see you. I just wanted you to know I'm okay, but I might not be home until very late tonight." "This is about your job, isn't it?" "I knew something like this would happen. Tour guiding isn't a real career, and now, Sarah, I can't talk about this right now. I have to go." He ended the call, feeling worse than before. Her reaction, while predictable, added another layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. He realized that even his personal relationships were going to suffer consequences from his moment of poor judgment. Constable Williams opened the rear door of the police car. "In you go, Mr. Thompson." Sitting in the back of a police car was the experience Marcus had never imagined having. The seats were uncomfortable. There were no door handles on the inside, and a thick plastic partition separated him from the officers in front. Through the windows, he could see tourists still gathered around the palace, some pointing at the cars they realized he was inside. As they drove through London traffic toward Westminster, Marcus's mind raced through the potential consequences he was facing. His job was almost certainly over. No tour company would keep a guide who had created a security incident at Buckingham Palace. But beyond that, what if he faced criminal charges? What if he couldn't get another job because of a criminal record? He thought about his parents in Yorkshire, who had always been proud of his work showing visitors around London's historic sites. His father, a retired postman who had enormous respect for British institutions, would be devastated to learn about this incident. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had spent 4 years telling tourists about the importance of respecting British traditions and royal protocol, only to violate those very principles in a moment of stress and poor judgment. "Mr. Thompson," Constable Davies said from the front seat, "when we get to the station, you'll be processed through our standard procedure. We'll take your statement, complete the incident report, and then determine how to proceed. The whole process should take several hours. Several hours." Marcus realized he would be spending his evening in a police station instead of at home with Sarah, trying to explain how a routine Tuesday afternoon had turned into the worst day of his professional life. As they pulled up to Westminster Police Station, a building he had passed hundreds of times while leading tour groups through central London, Marcus felt a deep sense of regret that went far beyond the immediate consequences he was facing. He had let down his tour group, his company, his girlfriend, and most importantly, himself. The car stopped, and Constable Williams got out to open Marcus's door. "Right then, let's get this sorted out." Westminster Police Station was busier than Marcus had expected. Officers moved purposefully through corridors, phones rang constantly, and there was an underlying sense of organized urgency that made him realize he was now part of London's official law enforcement system. Constable Williams led him to a small interview room with white walls, a metal table, and 3 chairs. The room was sterile and intimidating, with a recording device mounted on the wall and a large mirror that Marcus suspected was one-way glass. "Please have a seat, Mr. Thompson," Williams said, gesturing to the chair facing away from the mirror. "We'll be recording this interview for accuracy. Are you comfortable proceeding without legal representation? Or would you like us to arrange for a duty solicitor?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Part of him wanted a lawyer present, but another part worried that requesting one might make him look guilty or uncooperative. "I think I'd like to proceed for now, but can I change my mind if I need to?" "Absolutely. You can request legal representation at any point during this process." Constable Davies entered the room carrying a folder and sat down across from Marcus. The recording equipment was activated, and both officers stated their names and the time for the record. "Mr. Thompson, this interview is being conducted regarding an incident that occurred at approximately 2:47 p.m. today at Buckingham Palace, involving physical contact with a royal guard on duty. You understand you're here voluntarily to provide a statement about this incident?" "Yes, I understand," Marcus replied, his voice sounding strange to his own ears in the small room. "Please tell us, in your own words and in as much detail as possible, what led to the incident and what exactly occurred." Marcus took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the afternoon. He explained about the stressful morning, the larger-than-usual tour group, the heavy crowds at the palace, and his growing frustration with keeping everyone together. As he spoke, he realized how his explanation sounded. Every excuse he offered, the stress, the crowds, the schedule pressure, seemed inadequate compared to the seriousness of what he had done. "So you made a conscious decision to physically move the guard?" Davies asked for clarification. "Yes, but I want to be clear that it wasn't aggressive or meant to harm anyone. I was thinking of the guards as, well, like statues that wouldn't be affected. I realize now how completely wrong that thinking was. You understand that royal guards are active duty soldiers performing an official security function?" "Yes, I understand that now. At the time, I wasn't thinking clearly about their actual role and responsibilities." The interview continued for over an hour, with the officers asking detailed questions about Marcus's background, his training as a tour guide, his understanding of royal protocol, and his mental state at the time of the incident. During a break in the questioning, Marcus was left alone in the interview room. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights and distant sounds from the corridor outside. He found himself staring at his reflection in the one-way mirror, wondering if anyone was watching him from the other side. His phone, which had been returned to him after being logged as evidence, showed several missed calls from David Chen, his boss. There were also text messages from Jennifer updating him about the tour group, and increasingly worried messages from Sarah asking for more information about what had happened. When the officers returned, they brought news that made Marcus's heart sink even further. "Mr. Thompson, we've been in contact with the Palace Security Office and the commanding officer of the guard unit involved. This incident is being taken quite seriously at several levels." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. What does that mean exactly? Well, there are several potential charges that could apply to this situation. The most serious would be assault on a person in the execution of their duty, which is a more severe offense when it involves military personnel or royal protection. The word assault made Marcus feel physically sick, but I didn't hurt anyone. I just pushed him slightly to the side. Under British law, assault doesn't require injury, Mr. Thompson. It only requires unwanted physical contact with intent. The fact that this occurred during the execution of official royal duties makes it potentially more serious. Constable Williams continued, however, we've also been informed that Private Mitchell has indicated he doesn't wish to pursue personal charges, and Palace Security is considering this incident within the context of your apparent lack of malicious intent. This news provided a small ray of hope, but Marcus knew he wasn't out of trouble yet. What happens now? He asked. We're going to complete our investigation and forward our findings to the Crown Prosecution Service. They'll decide whether to bring formal charges. In the meantime, you'll be released pending further investigation. How long will that take? Could be anywhere from a few weeks to a few months depending on various factors. The idea of living under this uncertainty for months was almost as frightening as the potential charges themselves. Marcus realized his life was going to be in limbo, while bureaucratic wheels turned slowly through the British legal system. After completing additional paperwork and providing contact information, Marcus was finally released from the police station. It was nearly 8 p.m., and the autumn evening was growing dark as he emerged onto the street. His first instinct was to call a taxi home, but he realized he needed to face David Chen and the consequences at work before dealing with Sarah and his personal life. The London Heritage Tours office was only a 15-minute walk from the police station. As he walked through the familiar streets of central London, Marcus noticed everything differently. These were the same routes he had taken countless times with tour groups, sharing stories about British history and culture. Now he was walking them as someone who had violated the very traditions he had been paid to respect and explain to others. The irony was devastating. He had spent 4 years educating tourists about the importance of royal protocol, the significance of the guard's duties, and the proper behavior expected at royal sites. Yet in one moment of stress and poor judgment, he had failed to follow his own teachings. When he reached the London Heritage Tours office building, Marcus could see lights still on in the third-floor windows. David Chen was waiting for him, probably trying to figure out how to handle the company's first major incident involving police and royal security. Marcus took a deep breath and prepared to face the next phase of the consequences from his terrible decision. He knew that his career as a tour guide was probably over, but he hoped he could at least maintain some dignity in how he handled the aftermath. As he entered the building and pressed the elevator button for the 3rd floor, Marcus realized that this day had taught him more about the real importance of respect, tradition, and personal responsibility than all his years of reciting historical facts to tourists. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt like an eternity. When the doors opened, Marcus could see David Chen waiting in the reception area, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious stress and concern. David was a second-generation British-Chinese businessman who had built London Heritage Tours from a small family operation into one of the city's most respected tour companies. His reputation meant everything to him. Marcus, David said quietly as he approached, thank you for coming in. I know this has been a difficult day for you. The unexpected kindness in David's voice almost brought tears to Marcus's eyes. He had prepared himself for anger, disappointment, and immediate termination. Instead, his boss seemed genuinely concerned about his well-being. David, I am so sorry, Marcus began, but David held up his hand. Let's go to my office and talk properly. Jennifer filled me in on what she observed, but I need to hear the full story from you. They walked through the familiar office space where Marcus had spent countless hours preparing tour routes, studying London history and coordinating with other guides. The walls were covered with photos of happy tourists at famous landmarks, certificates of excellence from travel organizations, and historical maps of London. Seeing these reminders of the company's reputation made Marcus feel even worse about the damage he might have caused. David's office was warm and welcoming, with a large window overlooking the Thames. Under normal circumstances, Marcus enjoyed visiting this office to discuss tour improvements or share interesting stories from his groups. Tonight it felt like a courtroom where his professional future would be decided. "Sit down, Marcus," David said, settling behind his desk. "First, tell me how you're doing personally. Are you okay?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Honestly, David, I'm terrified. I've never been in trouble with the police before. I don't know what's going to happen to me." David nodded, understanding. "I can imagine. Now please walk me through exactly what happened today, from the beginning." Marcus recounted the entire story, from his stressful morning with Sarah, to the heavy crowds at the palace, to his moment of catastrophic poor judgment. David listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes but mainly just absorbing the details. When Marcus finished, David was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus, I've known you for 4 years. You're one of our most reliable guides. You know London history better than almost anyone, and you genuinely care about giving tourists a good experience. This behavior is completely unlike you." "It really is, David. I don't know what came over me. The stress, the crowds, everything just built up and I made a terrible decision." "Help me understand something," David said, leaning forward. "In 4 years of guiding tours, you've dealt with difficult groups, bad weather, transportation problems, and all sorts of challenges. What made today different?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think it was the combination of everything at once. My personal problems with Sarah, money stress, and then the largest group I've ever had on one of the busiest days I've ever seen at the palace. But honestly, David, none of that excuses what I did." David appreciated the honesty. "You're right, it doesn't excuse it. But it does help me understand that this was an aberration, not a pattern of behavior. What happens now?" "I assume I'm fired," David sighed deeply. "Marcus, I'm not going to lie to you. This situation is extremely serious for both you personally and for our company. We've already had 3 phone calls from journalists who heard about the incident through police scanners and social media. By tomorrow morning, this story could be in the newspapers." The thought of newspaper coverage made Marcus feel sick to his stomach. "Oh no, I didn't even think about media attention. The good news is that Jennifer handled your tour group brilliantly. All 43 tourists completed their day with a positive experience, and several actually complimented the company on how professionally we handled an unexpected situation." This small piece of good news provided minimal comfort given the larger disaster, but Marcus was grateful that his tourist hadn't suffered because of his mistake. "As for your employment," David continued, "I need to consult with our insurance company and legal advisors before making any final decisions. A situation involving police and royal security creates complications that are beyond my experience." "I understand completely, David. I know this puts the company in a terrible position. What I can tell you is that you're suspended from guide duties effective immediately, pending the outcome of the police investigation and our internal review. If criminal charges are filed, that would obviously create additional complications." The word suspended was better than fired, but Marcus knew the distinction might be temporary. "How long do you think the police investigation will take?" "I have no idea. I've never dealt with anything like this before. I've been running tours for 15 years, and the worst incident we've ever had was a tourist slipping on wet pavement. They discussed practical matters for the next 20 minutes. David would handle any media inquiries personally. Marcus would not speak to reporters under any circumstances, and all his upcoming tours would be reassigned to other guides. "Marcus," David said as their meeting concluded, "I want you to know that if this gets resolved without criminal charges, and if you can demonstrate that you've learned from this experience, there might be a path back to employment with us. But that's a big if, and it would depend on many factors beyond my control." "Thank you, David, that's more generous than I deserve. You've been a good employee for 4 years, and good people sometimes make terrible mistakes. I believe in second chances, but this situation is bigger than just what I believe." Marcus left the office feeling slightly better than when he had arrived, but still facing an uncertain future. The suspension meant he would have no income while the investigation proceeded, which would make his financial problems much worse. It was nearly 10 p.m. when he finally headed home to face Sarah. During the tube ride to their flat in Clapham, Marcus tried to organize his thoughts about how to explain the day's events. He knew Sarah would be upset, worried, and probably critical of his career choices once again. As he climbed the stairs to their second-floor flat, Marcus could see lights on and hear the television playing. Sarah was waiting up for him, probably having spent hours imagining what kind of trouble he had gotten into. He paused outside the door, taking a deep breath before inserting his key. This conversation would be almost as difficult as the police interview, but in a completely different way. Sarah's reaction would help determine whether he faced the uncertain months ahead alone or with support from the person closest to him. The key turned in the lock, and Marcus stepped inside to face the personal consequences of the worst professional decision he had ever made. Sarah was sitting on their small sofa in the living room, still wearing her work clothes from her job at the accounting firm. The television was on, but she was clearly not watching it. Her face showed the worry and stress of someone who had spent hours imagining worst-case scenarios. "Marcus," she said, standing up immediately when he entered. "Thank God you're home. I've been worried sick. What happened? Are you hurt? Are you in serious trouble?" Her genuine concern touched him, especially after their recent arguments about his career. "I'm not hurt and I'm home, but Sarah, I did something really stupid today, and yes, I'm in serious trouble." They sat down together, and Marcus recounted the entire story from beginning to end. Sarah listened with growing shock and disbelief, occasionally asking questions but mainly just absorbing the magnitude of what had happened. "You pushed a royal guard?" she said when he finished. "Marcus, how could you think that was okay?" "I wasn't thinking, Sarah. That's the whole problem. I was stressed about money, about work, about our relationship, and I just snapped for a moment." Sarah was quiet for a long time, processing everything. "So you could face criminal charges? And you might lose your job?" "Yes to both. David suspended me pending the investigation, and the police said it could take weeks or months to decide about charges." "What does that mean for us? For our rent, our bills, our future?" These were the practical questions Marcus had been dreading. "I don't know, Sarah. I might be able to get temporary work somewhere, but with a potential criminal case hanging over me, it won't be easy." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "Marcus, I need to be honest with you. This confirms everything I've been worried about with your career choice. Tour guiding isn't stable, it doesn't pay well, and now it's gotten you into legal trouble." "Sarah, this isn't about tour guiding as a career. This is about me making one terrible decision under stress. It could have happened in any job. But it didn't happen in any job, Marcus. It happened because you were trying to manage 40 tourists in a crowded public space with no backup, no security, and no real authority. That's not a sustainable career for an adult." Marcus felt his frustration rising, but he knew this wasn't the time for an argument. "What are you saying exactly?" Sarah turned back to face him. "I'm saying that maybe this is a wake-up call. Maybe it's time to seriously consider what you want to do with your life. You're 28 years old, Marcus. You can't guide tours forever, and this incident proves how precarious that kind of work really is. So you think I should just give up on something I actually enjoy doing? I think you should consider whether you enjoy it enough to risk your future for it. Because that's what happened today. You risked your future for a job that doesn't even provide financial security." The conversation continued for another hour, covering their relationship, their future plans, and the immediate practical challenges they would face. Sarah wasn't cruel or unsympathetic, but she was firm in her belief that this incident should be a catalyst for major life changes. Eventually, exhausted by the day's events, they went to bed. Marcus lay awake for hours, replaying every moment from the afternoon and wondering how different his life might look in a few months. The next morning brought a new challenge: media attention. David had warned him about potential newspaper coverage, but Marcus was still shocked to see his story mentioned in 2 London newspapers and several online news sites. The coverage was relatively brief and factual, but seeing his incident described in print made it feel even more real and permanent. His phone rang constantly throughout the morning, journalists requesting interviews, friends and family members who had seen the news, and even some strangers who had somehow obtained his number. Marcus followed David's advice and declined all media requests. The most difficult call came from his father in Yorkshire. "Marcus, lad, I saw the news this morning. Is this really what happened?" "Yes, Dad, it is. I made a terrible mistake and I'm dealing with the consequences." His father, who had always been proud of the royal family and British institutions, was clearly struggling to understand. "But why would you do such a thing? You know better than that." "I do know better, Dad. That's what makes it so awful. I let everyone down, including myself." The conversation with his father was painful but necessary. Marcus could hear the disappointment in the older man's voice, even as he tried to be supportive. Over the following weeks, Marcus experienced a strange kind of limbo. He couldn't work as a tour guide, couldn't make firm plans for the future, and couldn't escape the anxiety of not knowing whether criminal charges would be filed. He took a temporary job washing dishes at a restaurant near their flat, work that paid poorly but required no background checks or references. It was humbling to go from sharing London's history with international visitors to scrubbing pots in a kitchen, but it provided some income and gave him time to think about his future. Sarah's patience gradually wore thin as the uncertainty continued. Their relationship, already strained by career disagreements, struggled under the pressure of financial stress and an unclear future. 6 weeks after the incident, Marcus received a call from Constable Williams. "Mr. Thompson, I'm calling with an update on your case. The Crown Prosecution Service has decided not to pursue criminal charges, based on several factors including the guard's statement, your cooperation with the investigation, and your lack of previous incidents. The relief was overwhelming. Thank you so much, Constable Williams. This has been the worst 2 months of my life. There is one condition, though. You'll need to complete a community service program focused on education about royal protocols and British institutions. 80 hours over 6 months. I'll absolutely do that. Thank you." 2 days later, David called him to the office. "Marcus, now that the criminal matter is resolved, we can discuss your future with the company. I'm willing to offer you a probationary return to work, but with conditions." The conditions included additional training, supervision during tours, and a formal apology letter to the palace security office. Marcus accepted everything gratefully. 6 months later, Marcus had completed his community service, returned to work, and learned valuable lessons about stress management and professional behavior. He and Sarah had ended their relationship amicably, both recognizing they wanted different things from life. The incident that had initially seemed like the end of his world had actually become a turning point. Marcus approached his work with renewed respect for the institutions and traditions he represented. He also became an advocate for better training and support systems for tour guides. Most importantly, he learned that a single moment of poor judgment could have lasting consequences, but it didn't have to define the rest of his life. The key was taking responsibility, learning from mistakes, and working to rebuild trust and respect. Marcus never pushed another royal guard, and he never forgot the valuable lesson that stress and frustration are never excuses for abandoning the principles of respect and professionalism that make society function properly.